Hi, I'm Michael Merrigan, founder of Shadmoor Advisors, and welcome to the Shadmoor Overlook series. I'm delighted to be joined by Danielle Ostrander, President of Due Diligence at Gryphon Strategies, one of the leading business intelligence and investigation firms in the alternative investment industry. Danielle, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. You as well.
Would love to get background on you and how you got into the industry and an overview of Gryphon Strategies.
Yeah, sure. So, like most people, accidentally fell into the due diligence space. I got my undergrad in chemical engineering, came up to New Haven, Connecticut to get my master's in forensic science. And while I was getting my master's, found this internship at Gryphon and had never heard of the space, figured it was an internship in investigations. Go for it, give it a shot. So that was the beginning of 2008. Was ultimately offered a full-time position once I finished my master's. And at the time was like, not sure this is exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life, but I'm going to take this job for the next couple of years and see where it goes. And I never looked back. Absolutely love the industry, love what I do, and love being a part of it every day.
An interesting time to get into the
It was very interesting.
space.
Yes, it definitely was an interesting time.
For people who are unfamiliar, can you tell us a little bit about Gryphon Strategies and
Yeah, sure.
overview of it?
So Gryphon was formed in 1989. It is led by our overall president and CEO, Jay Doughty. And we have 5 business lines that we primarily focus on: business intelligence, global strategic advisory, asset tracing, litigation support, and most relevant to this conversation, due diligence. We have close to 100 employees now. We have most of our offices are in the US, but we also have 2 in the UK. And we have between 25 and 30 foreign languages that we can cover investigations in. So that really helps us to then cover the globe in terms of doing background checks on clients for the financial sector and doing that on companies and individuals. Right.
And of all the different business lines that Gryphon has, the one that I think you and I have touched points on more than any is the background check part of it.
Yeah, which is the biggest piece of
That's the biggest piece.
Yeah.
Why should people be doing background checks, in general? Like, why are people hiring you?
Yeah, so we have clients across the financial sector. That's where most of our clientele falls. We do some pre-employment checks as well, or checks on the corporate side, but most of our clients are in the financial sector. So everything from your small venture capital firms up to global investment banks and kind of everything between. We do quite a bit of work in the private equity space. We do a lot in the allocator space, obviously relevant to this conversation as well. And we just, overall sovereign wealth funds, pensions endowments, we really kind of run the gamut in terms of who our clientele is. And a lot of times we're doing these background checks for pre-investment purposes. So they want to get to know the individual. They want to get to know the entity. There's other reasons that we may do them as well. On the investment banking side, it could be deal-based. It could also be AML, KYC-based. So generally speaking, all background checks foundationally are very similar. But it's just, what's the aim? What's the target? What's the goal? What are the red flags for the client? And that's kind of where they start to diversify themselves.
And Gryphon is told which people are entity, or Gryphon kind of gives advice on which people are entity?
So we certainly provide that guidance. Generally speaking, though, our clients will be the ones that will tell us who they want to review. They may ask for recommendations on what jurisdictions are the most relevant. Where have they been? Where should our focus be? Where should we be targeting? So they may rely on us to do that. They also may lean into us when we talk about the corporate background checks, the corporate entity background checks, because they may say, hey, listen, we don't know anything about this corporation. We don't know where they were formed. We don't know how long they've been around. So can you give us some intel on that and help us decide whether or not that's a background check we want to move forward with?
So when people think about background checks, some people feel like that's a generic term. And I think it might be worth spending a few minutes on what constitutes a great background check.
Yeah. So I think people look, when they talk to me and they say, oh, you're a private investigator, that's so cool. Are you going, top secret, in the van, No, not that kind. Quite frankly, it's a little bit more boring than that. I mean, it's intriguing in other ways, but, we're not, outside hunting people down, tracking them down. There's others out there that do that kind of work. For us, it's very research focused, very heavy, behind the computer, a lot of research, a lot of report writing, and trying to dig through the information, cull through the information. A lot of times there's a lot of information out there for us to, pull together and then synthesize for our clients. So a lot of it is public records. I think some people think we get some top secret, information that's out there. And sometimes we can get intel that's not publicly available, which we can certainly talk about that as well. But a lot of times it's public records, but how do we get that information? Where do we get that information from? And then what do we do with it once we have it? So a lot of times we're looking at criminal records. Where have they been over the last 10 to 20 years? What jurisdictions have they been in? How do we get those criminal records? It's not all available online. So do we need to send somebody to the courthouse to get those records? Same with civil litigation. Is it online? Is it comprehensive online? Or do we need to, again, send somebody to the courthouse? We'll look into whether they have judgments or liens against them. If they filed for bankruptcy, we'll look at their media profile, their social media profile. Have they been on any watch lists? Are they an officer or director of corporations that the client may not be aware of that could be taking away from the time that they're spending on what the client is investing in? And then it sounds very simplistic, but verifying their education and employment history and making sure that that lines up with what they've reported and what they say they've done. The number of times I've seen people inflate those resumes or those bios and say they've gotten degrees that they haven't actually gotten is kind of astonishing.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like there's a lot of decision trees in these investigations. So it's something it seems like AI could be helpful, but maybe not do the whole job.
Exactly. So I think, AI, it's definitely something we have to embrace. But at the end of the day, people aren't paying us for an AI generated report. And in my opinion, that's not going to be beneficial to them either. So I think AI is certainly a helpful tool in helping to expedite some of our back end processes and what we do. But at the end of the day, clients are paying us for our expertise and our industry knowledge and being able to not just do those black and white searches, but fill in those shades of gray so they can make an informed decision in their investment.
I think one of the challenges that people have who are not deeply involved in the investigation space is they're very focused on price, right? Like a background check can cost X or Y, but it's somewhat opaque to them as to why is there a price difference, right? Is it just because of the price or is it because of the content and things like that? So is the idea that sort of a lot of background checks that are relatively cheap or inexpensive are very peripheral, and then Gryphon is just more thorough? Like how should people, when they analyze what service provider they should use for background checks, be thinking about asking questions about that?
Yeah, so I think certainly there's an element of you get what you pay for. I had somebody come to me one time and say, why should I use Gryphon? I can go online and get a nationwide criminal search for $39.95. Why wouldn't I just go do that? And I said, well, first of all, that's not even possible. You cannot do a nationwide criminal search in every court, federal and local, for $39.95. I mean, you can't even do it for more money. Like they're not all online. So I think having an understanding of what exactly you are getting is definitely crucial to the whole process. And I think sometimes, some of these marketing, they make things look real good. I've, again, had people show me breakdowns of what they get in the background check. I'm like, they're doing a really good job of portraying what you're getting, but you're not actually getting that. I can promise you that.
I also think too that there's this thought that I only need to be focused on criminal behavior, like that all of the other things are less important. But I think that when you're talking about sophisticated roles at financial institutions and people that are fiduciaries of your money, it's much, much more important. You're almost as focused on character as much as you are on just non-criminality.
Absolutely. As background check providers, we are not looking to kill a deal. We are not looking to sit there and find, every little, ounce. We are looking to find every detail we can on somebody, right, but we're not looking to do it to try and kill the deal. What we are trying to do is, again, provide the client with as much information as they can to make this informed decision. So sometimes a criminal record, for them, that may not be the end of the world. Maybe the individual was young, dumb, and stupid in college, so that may not be the end of the world. But if they've gotten 3 DUIs in the last 5 years, from a reputational, a risk perspective, that could be a huge deal. But maybe they're completely clean on the criminal side. Maybe they're completely clean on the civil side. But then we find those education, verifications that aren't coming through. And then we're digging into that. It's like, listen, in the public record, they're completely clean, but they don't have the degrees that they said they did. So, reputationally, if they're going out there, it's like, okay, well, what else are they lying about? What else are they putting out there about us or about themselves that's not necessarily true? You and I have talked before about social media, right? Like that's a ever evolving thing, and trying to stay on top of it is certainly a challenge. And for us, that's not the end of the world to have social media profiles. Everybody's entitled to that, and everybody's entitled to post their opinions. But sometimes they can get a little bit over the top in what they're posting. So, if you're working with, maybe a nonprofit that's looking to make some investments, and there's a lot of political posts for this particular person, and they are leading one particular direction, the nonprofit may say, hey, listen, this does not align with our thoughts and our beliefs. And maybe that is a deal stop for them. Or maybe it's just a matter of you need to tighten down that public, profile and make it private so that this is not, causing exposure for us.
Right. What are your thoughts about where background checks fall within the overall investment process?
Oh gosh, that's such a challenging question because some people will say, do I do them at the beginning or do I do them at the end? And again, like we're not out to kill the deal. So like I'd hate to be we're doing it at the end and then we find something, they're like, right. Oh my gosh, we went through this whole process. At the same time, I see where clients are coming from. Like, I don't want to spend all the money up front if, we're going to find something else in the investment process that is going to kind of kill the deal. So, I think it really comes down to, risk appetite for the clients and kind of how much skin in the game they have for that particular deal or that particular investment. Or sometimes it's just a personal preference. I think more often than not, we're seeing it in the beginning of the investment process because they don't want it to be an afterthought. They don't want it to be like, okay, let's just check the box because they do want to know if they're going to find something. They do want to know if there's going to be something that they need to be aware of. And then they have that runway and that bandwidth to be able to go back to that, subject and say, hey, listen, tell me more about this because we need to get comfortable with it before we can move forward.
Because I think, too, in the order of operations, knowing that earlier is going to save them money on a lot of other due diligence that they would have done.
Exactly.
Which may have worked out if, in the absence of this, information. Many, and certainly our clients are, quote unquote, global investors now. They're looking at managers in all over the place, developed economies, non-developed economies. And I think that there's interest in doing background checks on people that are outside of the US and outside of developed countries. And how does Gryphon manage those types of requests?
Yeah, so overall at Gryphon, we do, last checks are probably somewhere between 10,000 and 12,000 background checks annually. And it's interesting because the percentage of what we're doing domestically is actually going down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a little bit each year. We have exposure to doing background checks globally. And I think, one of the biggest challenges is getting clients to understand exactly what records are available and what challenges there's going to be in those particular jurisdictions. The U.S. is amazing when it comes to being able to get public records. And I think a lot of people go in with the persona of course, yes, I can do this anywhere in the world then. So, and what I tell clients is we will get whatever is available publicly, whatever is out there. But I'm going to tell you not everything is public. And sometimes even what's public isn't the complete story. When you talk about some certain jurisdictions, I'm sure we can all guess what those jurisdictions are. There's certain times where the media, kind of gets shut down on certain things, or it's something will come out and say, oh, XYZ, huge lawsuit came out, and then it kind of goes away because the next big thing comes out. So for us, it's kind of explaining those challenges to clients and where the limitations are going to be is one of the biggest things that we need to do from an education perspective. But then what I also tend to do, and when you're talking about levels of checks and kind of what do levels of checks entail, what I might try to do in those situations too is encourage them to kind of step the check up a little bit. So listen, the public records are going to be limited. There's no way to get the criminal records. There's no way to get the civil litigation unless it's publicized in the media, in which case, again, we're going to track it down because we are doing those searches in English and in the local language. But then what you may want to do is talk to locals on the ground. You talk to people who are former law enforcement, former politicians who are in the industry, people that are in a position to be able to ask questions and kind of inquire discreetly, right? We obviously don't want to tip anybody off that this particular person or company is being asked about. But they can talk to people on the ground and say, what can you tell me about their reputation? We heard about XYZ lawsuit. Can you tell me what happened with that lawsuit? Do you think it was a credible lawsuit? Are there any more details that may not be in the public domain? And we've actually been able to get quite a bit of intel that way too, which is super helpful when you're talking about some of these jurisdictions where the records are not so publicly available.
Sometimes I think in conversations we find the investors are trying to figure out, do we need the consent of the subject of the background check? And what are your thoughts about that? Does it weaken the background check if we don't have the consent and get all that background information from the subject, or is it not really necessary just given all the faculties that you have?
Yeah, so when it comes to pre-investment checks, our signed release form is not required. However, I do tell clients, the caveat being when it comes to verifying education and employment history, being able to do that directly with the institutions or with the schools, we won't be able to do because 9 times out of 10, they're going to require that we have that signed release form to be able to disclose information to a third party. In those instances, what we'll typically do is look for supporting information where we can. So non-self-reported, regulatory filings, media articles, press releases, graduation announcements, something that supports that they did in fact go to that school or they did work for that company. We probably will not be able to get down so granular to what are the dates of that they were employed at the company or what was the date that they graduated, but at least, they're not completely making it up. Some clients will actually still have us try and make those inquiries to the employers, if even without the release. Which we're happy to do. I mean, you certainly run the risk that maybe they still know the person and it could get back to them. So clients tend to avoid that route just because, usually if they don't have a release, it's because they want to do it on a discrete basis. And we do a number of discrete inquiries regularly.
Another topic that I think is an emerging trend is people are trying to figure out how they should manage the possibility of a recurring background check, especially where a person, and particularly at an investment manager, is in like a key control position around cash or something like that. There may have been a background check at the inception of this relationship. Now I think people are trying to figure out, like, for those key control people, should those be happening at some recurring basis, either annually or semi-annually? What are your thoughts about that trend?
Yeah, so we use the terminology refreshers and ongoing monitoring. And for some people, they use them interchangeably. But the way that we see it, so refreshers will be more extensive scope, but you're going to be doing them less frequently. So the cadence that we see with clients is anywhere between 6 months and 3 years that they'll do a refresher on the most recent background check that they've done. So we'll cover all the public records from the last time we did the check to the present. And then the other option would be the ongoing monitoring. So with ongoing monitoring, it's more frequent, but it's a higher level check. You're just looking for those major media mentions, particularly from an adverse nature, regulatory records, high-level litigation. So those are the key things that we're focusing on, but we'll be doing them on a daily basis and looking for those hits. There's a lot of offerings out there, and we've even heard clients who have this ongoing monitoring internally where they can run it themselves and then they get the results. Google Alerts, that sort of thing, yeah. But what they're finding is that it's a lot of false positives. Yeah. So they almost have to hire another person or just completely ignore the results altogether and never get to it, which is not entirely beneficial. So the way that we see ongoing monitoring working the best is that we do the alerts. We get the automation done on our end, then we vet those results and only let our client know if something is worth noting. It is in fact our subject. It is in fact a red flag. So then they're not getting this data dump of information. Okay.
One of the things that I find comes up quite often is this sort of equating of a reference check with a background check, right? And what are your thoughts about that?
Right. So if somebody provides you a reference, presumably it's going to be something positive, right? You're going to hear something positive about the subject, and that's what you'd expect. So I do think doing references is important, a part of the process, but it's not the be-all, end-all. And for us, again, with the background checks, we're not trying to kill the deal. We're not trying to just find bad stuff, but we are trying to find that overall profile of the person and find stuff that the client may not be aware of about them. And quite frankly, that a reference may not be aware of about them as well. So just trying to fill out those shades of gray. We can do those black and white, we know, the criminal, the civil, but like filling those shades of gray. Are there trends? Are there patterns of behavior? Is there anything here that kind of sticks out to us and says, hey, maybe not the end of the world, but you should be digging into this a little bit deeper. And I think, for me, it's kind of going back a ways to the beginning of my career here at Gryphon, 2008. But I think it was a pinnacle time. And, Bernie Madoff, everybody's heard of him. And we kind of did a retroactive background check on him. And one of the things that we learned was that he actually did not allow people to do background checks on himself. And he said, listen, look at all these people that are invested with me. Don't you trust them? Don't, why
like
you
herd mentality.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Why not? If you want to do it, go on your happy way. But all these people trust me and they're doing it and it seems to be working for them. So why not just join in? So I kind of maybe an extreme example, but certainly, I think it's important and it's relevant to, you don't know what you don't know. And that's where the benefit of doing the background check comes in.
When people use this sort of, mosaic theory of the investment process, I don't think they often think background checks are a piece in that puzzle. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I think it's a necessary piece of that puzzle. So I think it's key. To your point, not everybody is doing it. But I think for them, I think the key is that you need to do it because, again, you don't know what you don't know, but they see it as an added cost. And they think that the cost is going to outweigh the benefit. But at the same time, they're underestimating what the risk is, and they're overestimating what they already know and what the familiarity is with the person or with the company. And at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, we don't find very much. I don't want to say the checks are easy,
which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing,
It's
right?
a very good thing.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like it's so easy and simplistic, because there's a lot that we go through to get to the point that we can say, yes, I think there's a level of comfort for you to move forward. But that one check, that one time, that's going to be what justifies your reason for doing checks across the board.
And I think a lot of investors have just not encountered that yet. And God willing, they will not. But the ones that have, they will never sacrifice that.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. I guess in terms of just closing out our conversation, what are your thoughts about the future of background checks? Like what are you seeing in terms of client demands? We talked a little bit about AI. Where do you think the trends are going to be going forward?
Yeah. So again, I think AI is something that we need to embrace. It's really something that we need to hold on to. I mean, we can't, we have to use it, right? Everybody's going to have to use it in some form or fashion. But clients aren't paying us for AI-generated reports or AI-generated outputs. They're not paying us for the data dump, and they're paying us to vet the information and giving them what they need to make informed decisions. Mm-hmm. So for us, we see AI as something that we're going to embrace on the back end to help us put together, very comprehensive reports. And a lot of times there's information that goes into every report, and maybe that's where AI helps us out, right? It helps kind of put together that skeleton. But then our analysts will have the time to spend where clients are most interested. The litigation, the media, the stuff that is not the black and white, the shades of gray, and putting together those patterns of behavior. So, we have the expertise, we have the intel. We've been doing this for over 35 years. We know what to look for, and we know how to find the information that we're looking for. So I think at the end of the day, there's automated solutions out there. They're quick, they're cheap, but you're going to get what you pay for, and it's not going to be as comprehensive as what you're going to get with a firm like Gryphon.
And I think one of the big takeaways too is that the investors at the pre-investment stage, all options are on the table. Once the investment's been made, especially in more private equity and private market type, vehicles, they're not coming out of those vehicles for years.
Right.
And you need this information now,
right,
so that you can make decisions that otherwise will really prevent you from getting your money back,
right,
unlike a mutual fund or something like that.
And to your point, you need to be doing those recurring checks too, because you need to know, who you're in business with. And you need to know, okay, they were clean now, but in 3 years from now, is there anything that's happened that you need to be aware of and kind of get ahead of too? Because the last thing you want to do is have somebody from the outside come in and say, hey, what about X, Y, Z?
And I think one of the things that we've encountered as well is that, not ill-intentionally, but it is happening, is that a lot of the smaller and emerging managers, which there is an enormous amount of interest in, they are not doing background checks on their own employees. So then if you as the investor are not doing background checks, you're really in a place where there's just a real gap of information.
Yeah. So, it's kind of real quickly, I'll just address that too. Some clients will actually hire us on the manager side to do self-diligence. So they'll hire us to say, do background checks on us. Mm-hmm. Let's find out what you can find out about us, and what investors, when they come in, are going to find out about us. So we can go in proactively and say, here's what you're going to find. We had an independent third party do this check on us, and we want to tell you and explain it to you ahead of time and try and save some time on your own. And we know you'll probably end up doing the check yourself too, but at least you know what you're going to find.
Yeah, and because the worst situation is when an investor comes in and says, we found out about X, Y, and Z, and the owners of the firm are like, we didn't know about that.
And we've been in that situation, yes.
It's a situation that is just not worth being in relative to the cost.
No.
So this is cheap insurance.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very good way to say it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
really
appreciate
great
your time,
to see you, and great to learn more about Gryphon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.